Dawn crept slowly over the whispering waters of the Tumblestone, pale gold stretching in soft ribbons across the meadows and wild hedges that guarded Riverrun's crumbling walls. Catelyn Stark stood in the solar above the river gate, her eyes dry and her face hard, and watched the light crawl toward the ruined bridge that once had connected her father's house to all the Riverlands. Even in summer, the air seemed thin as a funeral shroud. The quiet was not the peace of a house at rest, but a hush fraught with portents. It was the silence before a storm. Her hair had turned wholly gray in the last year, and her hands bore the faintest tremors, reminders of all she had lost. Her Lord Father, her boy Robb, her daughters gone to shadow and silence, her land torn apart by war and betrayal. She no longer wept, not openly. The Lady of Riverrun had given her last tears to the gods the night she learned of the Red Wedding, when the full horror of Frey treachery and Bolton cruelty had found her in the cold cellars below the Twins. Since then, she had let her sorrow freeze to steel. She stood now, fingers locked at the small of her back, surveying the wakeful morning and the small folk already moving beyond the walls. The miller's son, skinny and quick as a wren, was turning the water wheel with a pole. Two washerwomen hung damp linens, murmuring behind their hands. Catelyn's gaze lingered on them, the ordinary folk who must live beneath the yoke of men like Walder Frey. They had no choice but to bend or break. The lords and banners of the Riverlands had been ground beneath the boot heel of the Freys since the day Lord Walder's crossbows spat death into Robb Stark's back. It was a poison that had spread through every town and hamlet, from Maidenpool to Fairmarket, souring crops and blackening hearts. Catelyn's jaw tightened. She would not be content with mourning. She would not allow her father's house and her son's memory to languish in chains, nor her people to live as cattle beneath a lord like Frey. They needed a rallying cry, a cause, and she would give it to them or die in the attempt. Sir Desmond Grell's boots sounded on the stones outside the door, a quick, urgent cadence. He entered, cheeks ruddy from the cold and his eyes wary. "Lady Stark," he said, bowing his head. "Lord Piper waits in the great hall. Lady Went and Lord Vance are arrived as well. There are others." Catelyn nodded. She drew her cloak about her shoulders. A plain woolen thing dyed the blue of House Tully. The silver trout worked in thread barely visible. She had not worn the river clasp in many moons. It was buried with her father in the Godswood, the steel dulled with tears. She felt the weight of the house she must now lead, not as a wife or mother, but as a banner raised. "See that my sister's men are given food and shelter, Desmond. The Freys will be watching the roads. Post double the guards." Grell hesitated, lips pursed. "You mean to move against them, my lady?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "The Freys must answer for what was done at the Twins. The time for mourning is done, Sir Desmond. Tell Lord Piper and the others I will join them now." He bowed again, deeper this time. "As you command, my lady." She let him go and stood another moment, gathering herself. Her father's solar smelled faintly of must and cedar. The sword that had belonged to Hoster Tully hung above the hearth, its pommel shaped as a leaping trout, its blade still sharp. She took it down, feeling the unfamiliar heft in her hand, then drew herself up and strode from the room. The great hall of Riverrun was cold, even with a fire crackling in the hearth. Lords and ladies in faded finery clustered on benches, Titus Blackwood in his black and scarlet, stout and grave. Lysa's knightly cousin, Sir Brynden, Blackfish Tully, gray and lean, and sharp-eyed as a hawk. Lady Went with her heavy rings and wary face, Lord Piper pacing with nervous energy, a half-dozen minor bannermen and hedge knights. Faces, all eyes turned as she entered, and the low hum of anxious conversation died to a hush. She let her gaze travel among them, finding fear, hope, uncertainty. Many of these had bent the knee to House Frey, at least in name, but not in heart. The Riverlands had always been a land of strong wills and deeper wounds. If she faltered, all would be lost. "I thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady, resonant in the vaulted chamber. "We are gathered in Riverrun not as vassals to the Twins, but as children of the Trident. House Frey sits upon us like a blight, roots sunk deep by blood and betrayal. My son and king was murdered beneath a guest's roof, as was my lord brother Edmure's bride and her kin. My father's house is diminished, but not dead. My father's house is diminished, but not dead. She drew the sword, letting it ring on the flagstones as she planted it before her. I will not let the Freys rule this land by murder and fear. I call upon you, upon every true lord and lady of the Riverlands, to cast off the yoke and ride with me. For our kin, for justice, for the trident. Then so. Silence hung a heartbeat, and then Blackfish rose, slow and certain, cloak swirling behind him. I will ride at your side, niece, he said, voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I swore an oath to House Tully. I'll not break it now, not to Walder Frey, not to any man. Tito's Blackwood rose too, hands broad as shovels gripping the table. House Blackwood remembers. We have no love for Frey. You have my swords, Lady Catelyn, if you'll have them. One by one the others rose. Piper, Vance, went, pledging banners and men. It was not an army, not yet, but the beginning of one. Catelyn's breath came easier for a moment. She saw the tremble in her hand and stilled it with effort, closing her fist around the sword's pommel. Lord Piper's voice broke the swelling quiet. The Freys hold the crossings. If we march on the twins, they'll shut the gates and call the Lannisters for aid. And Roose Bolton holds the north, and Harrenhal besides. Lady Went interrupted, her tone shrewd. But they are not loved. Every town between here and the Green Fork grumbles at Frey levies and cruel stewards. Give the folk a reason to hope, my lady, and you'll have your host. Catelyn nodded, absorbing each word. Her mind raced with the logistics. Food, arms, spies, routes. She saw again the miller's son, the washerwomen, and knew the price of failure. We cannot strike at the twins directly. Not yet. We must cut away the Frey roots, town by town. Their strength is in the crossings, but their weakness is in their pride. They have made enemies on every side. We must find allies. Sow dissent, bring the Riverlords to our cause. Nenmasani. Lord Vance, a younger man, unblooded, asked quietly, "And if the Lannisters come?" Catelyn's mouth was a thin line. "Then we will give them a war they cannot win. The lions grow fat and lazy in the west. They do not understand the rivers, nor the woods. We will bleed them, and if we must die, let us die with swords in our hands and our honor intact." A low murmur of assent rippled through the hall. Blackfish's eyes found hers, and for a moment, she saw in him a flash of her father's spirit. Fierce and undiminished. "The Freys took my kin," he said, voice rough as gravel. "But they did not take my pride. Riverrun will stand with you, Cat, as long as I draw breath." They began then to plan. Quiet, methodical, their words low and swift. Scouts would be sent to the fords and villages, whispering promises of freedom and vengeance. Ravens would fly to Old Stones, to Raven Tree, to the Green Apple, to Derry and Acorn Hall, wherever the old houses nursed grudges or fresh wounds. Blackfish would command the garrison. Piper would ride west with a handful of swift men to raise the Pipers and Blackwoods. Lady Went would send for her kin. Every man and woman present understood the risks. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and hemmed by Frey spies and Lannister gold. But in Catelyn's steady presence, they found resolve. When the council broke, Catelyn lingered by the hearth, watching the flames. She felt the weight of every word, every promise. Her husband's ghost seemed to stand beside her. Nend, grave and kind-eyed, whispering courage she feared she no longer possessed. She remembered her sons as babes in the snow of Winterfell, Arya's laughter, Sansa's songs. She remembered Robb on the eve of his first battle, the quiet certainty in his voice. She would not let them down. By noon, the banners of House Tully fluttered above Riverrun's towers, blue and silver bright against the sky. Small folk and household knights thronged the bailey. Brynden Blackfish's men moved with purpose, drilling archers in the yard, sharpening swords and binding wounds that never fully healed. In the kitchens, the cooks prepared a feast, more meager than in the old days, but plentiful enough to feed every mouth within the walls. Catelyn ate sparingly, her mind always elsewhere. She spent the afternoon in her father's solar with Lady Went and Septon Oswin, composing letters. Each was careful, measured, a call to arms veiled as an appeal for justice, invoking the gods of river and tree. She wrote to House Mallister, still proud and strong at Seaguard, to Sir Mark Piper, ever restless, to Lady Smallwood, whose riders knew every byway and secret path from Pink Maiden to Harrenhal. Come to River Run. She wrote, for your kin and country. The Riverlands must be free again. Twilight brought a cold rain, and with it word from the west. Piper's outriders returned with tidings. Lord Frey had sent a levy to the villages near Fairmarket, demanding food and tribute for his garrison. In Acorn Hall, the Blackwoods were raising their banners. Even the Brackens, ancient rivals of Blackwood, whispered of revolt. Lady Went's spies brought news from the twins. Walder Frey had dismissed half his men, sending them to collect tithes from the small folk. The old man thought himself secure, but arrogance bred weakness. That night, Catelyn called the council again. We must move quickly, she said. If the Freys hear of our designs, they will strike before we are ready. I propose we ride first to Seaguard. Jason Mallister is no friend to Walder Frey. If he joins us, we will have strength to match their crossings. From there, we can harry their supply lines and win the hearts of the townsfolk. If we take Seaguard, others will follow. Tito's Blackwood nodded. A bold move, my lady. I'll bring every bow I can muster. Piper grinned, a flash of the boy he once was. The Freys have made enemies everywhere. Give the word, and my men will ride by dawn. Lady Went's voice was softer, but her eyes shone. The river remembers, Lady Stark. So do the women. My household will ride with you. Men shall. Blackfish, standing by the door, unsheathed his sword and tapped it against his boot. We ride at first light. I'll see to the men. They dispersed, purpose burning in their eyes, and Catelyn found herself alone again. She let herself weep, briefly, the tears hot and silent on her cheeks, then brushed them away. She would not let Robb's memory drown in grief. She would make it a beacon, a light to lead the Riverlands home. She retired to her chamber. Sleep elusive, the wind rattled the shutters, and beyond, the river sang its low, mournful song. She dreamed of wolves running in the snow, of trout leaping in moonlit pools, of fire and blood and steel. She awoke before dawn, heart pounding, a single thought echoing through her mind. Not as a wife, nor as a mother, nor as a victim, as a leader, as a Stark and Tully both. When the horns sounded at first light, the gates opened, and Riverrun's garrison rode out beneath the Trout and Direwolf banners. Catelyn rode at their head. She wore no crown, but the men and women who followed her saw in her face the glimmer of hope reborn. They cheered her name as she passed, and she raised her hand in silent salute. They passed through the outer gate and into the fields beyond, dew silvering the grass, the world washed clean by the night's rain. The roads to Seaguard and the western marches sprawled ahead, haunted by threat and promise alike. The host was small, 300 swords, a scattering of mounted archers, a dozen lords and their sworn shields. Yet as they wound their way along the river, banners snapping in the wind, the numbers swelled. Farmers with spears, millers with axes, hedge knights and old men in battered mail joined their ranks. At every village, small folk lined the road, some silent, some whispering prayers. Here and there, a boy or girl slipped from the crowd to walk beside the column, carrying only hope and a ragged cloak. By midday, a dust cloud rose ahead, and scouts returned with news. Lord Mallister's men, armed and wary, rode to meet them. Jason Mallister himself greeted Catelyn beneath the boughs of an old willow, his eagle's helm tucked beneath one arm. He was older than she remembered, lines carved deep in his face, but his eyes were keen. Lady Stark, he said, River Run stands tall once more. She dismounted, ignoring the ache in her legs, and clasped his hand. "Seaguard's banners would be a beacon, my lord." "The time for silence is done." Mallister studied her a moment, then nodded. "You have my sword and my sons. My men hunger for justice. The Freys will find no welcome here." "Ma'am?" That night, they camped in the fields outside Seaguard, fires burning bright against the gloom. Mallister's host joined theirs, swelling the column to nearly 1,000. Still too few to meet the Freys in open battle, but enough to harry their foragers and cut their lines of supply. Messengers galloped to the Blackwoods, the Wents, the small woods, calling every banner and levy. The first true resistance in a year had come, and the Riverlands quivered like a drawn bowstring. Catelyn walked the camp, speaking to the men, learning their names and stories. There were sons and fathers, widows and orphans, all with some grievance against the Freys. She listened, promising nothing she could not give, but giving each a reason to hope. In the quiet of her own tent, she penned more letters, her hand unsteady with exhaustion. "I have no magic, no dragons," she thought, "but I have justice. Let that be enough." On the third morning, scouts brought word that a Frey column was marching from the Twins, 200 men-at-arms, armored and mounted, with a baggage train swollen by plunder. They had heard rumors of revolt and meant to put it down swiftly. Catelyn called her council again. "We must strike before they reach the ford. If we break them, word will spread. The Freys are not invincible. Let every man and woman who can bear arms stand ready. This is our chance." Blackfish grinned, a hard wolfish smile. "Let me lead the vanguard, Cat. I'll show the Freys how the river bites." Mallister agreed. "My archers will take the woods. We'll hem them in, break their line, then strike from both flanks." Piper's voice was eager. "I'll take the left. Give me 10 men and a prayer, and I'll have their baggage train for the small folk." "Then no." Catelyn nodded. "We fight at dusk. Let the river hide us, and the woods be our cloak." The battle, when it came, was swift and brutal. The Frey host, swollen with loot and arrogance, never expected to be met with steel and fire. Mallister's archers struck from the shadows, arrows hissing like wasps, cutting down the front ranks. Blackfish led the charge, his men screaming vengeance, and Piper's riders swept from the flank. The Freys broke in confusion, stumbling over their own baggage train, slaughtered by men they thought cowed and beaten. Catelyn watched from the rise, heart clenched, until it was done. When the dust cleared, Blackfish returned, sword red, his face splattered with mud and blood. "It is done, Cat. The river runs red, but it is clean again." Done. The victory was small, but it rang through the Riverlands like thunder. The defeated Freys were stripped of their banners and sent back to the Twins with a message. The Riverlands would be ruled by riverlords, not traitors. Ravens flew, and each house that had bent the knee to the Twins now weighed its loyalties anew. That night, by the fire, Catelyn felt the first tremor of hope in her heart since the day of the Red Wedding. She allowed herself a moment to remember Robb, not as the lost boy king, but as the hope of the North and Riverlands reborn in every sword she now led. Tomorrow, there would be new dangers. Bolton's knives, Lannister gold, Frey treachery yet undimmed. But tonight, as the river murmured and the fires burned bright, Catelyn Stark, Lady of Riverrun, mother of the wolf and trout, knew she had given her people a future worth fighting for. The river was swollen with rain and thaw. Sluggish but relentless, carrying last year's leaves and twigs down to the fords where broken Frey shields drifted like so much flotsam. Dawn on the fourth day after their small victory came veiled in thick gray mist, the kind that muffled hoofbeats and made the banners limp and sodden above the clustered tents. Catelyn rose before the sun and walked the camp's muddy lanes with Blackfish, the dew cold against her cheeks, breathing in the mingled scents of wet earth, wood smoke, and sweat. The men rose slowly, hungry but lighter of spirit than she had seen them in many moons. A spark had been lit, and Catelyn could sense the tinder catching, a dangerous hope, bright and consuming. They buried the dead at sunrise, Tully and Piper and Blackwood alike, their bodies laid beneath stones along the riverbank with sword or spear clutched in cold hands. The small folk murmured prayers for the fallen, and Sept and Oswin intoned words for the stranger and the mother both. Catelyn stood silent beside Lord Mallister, watching mist curl over the water. There were not so many corpses as she had feared, but even one was too many. She pressed her lips tight and resolved that none would be forgotten. Her grief would not cripple her. It would drive her, as surely as the river drove driftwood to the sea. That morning, as crows wheeled above the woods, a rider thundered in from the east. Cloak streaming, splattered with mud from brow to boot. He slid from the saddle before Catelyn's tent and knelt, breathless. "From Raventree, my lady," he said. "Blackwood banners march. Lord Titos is but a day behind us, bringing 400 men." Catelyn's heart leapt. "And the Brackens?" The rider hesitated, nervous. "Sir Hoster Bracken rides with his men as well, but he sends word his loyalty is to the Riverlands, not to House Tully." Blackfish snorted beside her. "The Brackens have never wasted a chance for boasting. They'll ride where the wind blows. So long as they can fight Freys, they're with us." Catelyn nodded. "Tell Lord Titos we'll wait at the old stones for 2 days, no more. When Bracken and Blackwood march together, the river itself will tremble." She sent the rider off, then turned to Blackfish. "You know what this means. It means we must keep them pointed at the Freys, not at each other." Blackfish replied. His tone was dry, but a smile played about his lips. "That will take more skill than any battle." They broke camp before midday, the host rowing with each league, broken men from the villages, riders out of Derry and Acorn Hall, grim-faced women carrying knives in their girdles. Word of their victory spread ahead of them like the cry of geese before a storm. Every house with a grievance, every town where Frey stewards had stolen grain or daughters, sent at least one sword or sickle. As they wound along the river road, the air was alive with rumors. Of Roose Bolton's men sacking Maidenpool, of Lannister gold riding north through the neck, of Lord Edmure Tully chained, but living in the dungeons of Casterly Rock, of Arya Stark glimpsed in a kitchen at Harrenhal, of direwolves running wild through the Weald. Catelyn listened, sifting truth from falsehood, holding on to hope with teeth and nails. The old stones rose from a wooded hill above the Trident, ancient ruin and haunted memory. It was there, among the moss-eaten blocks and shattered arches, that the Blackwoods joined them, banners streaming black and scarlet. Lord Titos himself greeted Catelyn with an embrace, his beard bristling, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "You have done what no man dared," he whispered to her, as they stood apart for a moment. "You have given the river its heart again." That night, beneath a sky heavy with the promise of rain, they feasted together on hard bread, roast mutton, and sour wine. Blackwood and Bracken eyed each other warily across the fires, but for the moment, their hatred of Frey outweighed old feuds. Lady Smallwood arrived before midnight with 100 riders, most of them girls or women in boiled leather, each carrying a bow or an axe. "We've been waiting for this," she said, her face fierce in the torchlight as she greeted Catelyn. "The twins have bled the land dry, and every woman who's lost a brother or son to Frey arrows will fight for you, my lady." Catelyn took her hand. "You will have your chance. The Freys have sent for reinforcements from Harrenhal. If we move quickly, we may catch them before their strength doubles." Mallister mapped the next steps with stones and twigs around the fire. "We strike north at dawn, past Pink Maiden, then cross the Green Fork below the twins. If we draw them out, they'll leave the twins exposed. And if we can lure a Lannister column to meet us, well, lions and trout have swum together before." Blackfish was more cautious. "We cannot match the Freys or Boltons in the field. We must bleed them and fade. Take their food, cut their lines, make them chase shadows until they tire and falter. Lord Piper, always the boldest, laughed. We'll give them ghosts then, and nightmares for their beds." Through all this, Catelyn listened, weighed, and decided. In her father's house she had always been taught that women's work was peace and reconciliation, soothing wounds and settling quarrels. Now, she was learning that leadership was a different sort of healing, a cutting away of rot, a refusal to let wounds fester. We march at first light. The river will judge us. Let us not be found wanting. The camp slept in fitful peace that night, but Catelyn wandered between the tents, checking the guards, offering quiet words to the wounded and afraid. In a lean-to near the edge of camp, she found Lady Smallwood sitting with a half-dozen girls, sharpening knives and whispering tales of the old days. They fell silent as she approached, their eyes wide, but Catelyn sat with them a while, listening as they spoke of lost brothers and stolen grain, of fathers hanged and daughters stolen for Frey beds. She promised them justice and prayed she would be able to keep it. At dawn, mist blanketed the woods and the column moved like ghosts through the trees. 2,000 strong now, banners dark against the pale sky. Scouts ranged ahead, slipping along the muddy trails, while Blackfish led the vanguard. The main body of the host snaked behind, flanked by the Blackwoods on the left and Brackens on the right, their banners side by side. If only for this day. The first Frey outpost fell before noon. Surprised and overwhelmed, a dozen Frey men taken captive, 2 slain, and 1 old knight surrendered his sword to Catelyn herself. He knelt in the mud, battered and bloodied, eyes bright with shame and fear. "My lady, I served Hoster Tully before Walder Frey. I am too old for this war." Catelyn regarded him with grave sympathy. "Then serve the Riverlands once more, sir. You may keep your sword if you give me your oath not to raise it against us." He pressed his lips to her hand and wept. "As you command, my lady." Word spread quickly. By dusk, their host had swelled again, and Frey patrols fell back in confusion, uncertain of the numbers or intentions of the rebel army. In a village near the Green Fork, a woman with steel-gray hair and hands rough as bark begged an audience with Catelyn. "My husband died at the Red Wedding," she said simply. "My eldest son was pressed into Frey service, never to return. My youngest is all I have left. We will fight for you, my lady. Only say the word. Now and see." Catelyn embraced her, feeling the woman's bones beneath the threadbare cloak, and whispered, "For all our lost, for all our children." That night, Blackfish returned with grim tidings. "The Freys are mustering at the Twins. Lord Walder has called every bannerman, and word is that Sir Ryman Frey marches from Harrenhal with Bolton men at his back. We must strike before they can join forces." Catelyn called a council in her tent, lit by a single guttering candle. Mallister was first to speak. "If we can take Pink Maiden, we may draw the Freys south, away from the Twins. A feint to make them think our target is Lannister gold, not the crossings." Lady Smallwood nodded. "My riders can take the woods and harry their baggage train. If we cut their food, their men will desert." Benderol. Tito's Blackwood counseled patience. "The Brackens will not hold the line if pressed from both sides. We must not overreach." But Catelyn saw a different path. "We must make the Freys believe we are everywhere and nowhere." A dozen columns moving through the woods, burning their foraging parties, freeing villages, harrying the roads. When Walder's patience snaps, he will send his sons out from the Twins to chase us. Then we strike, divide and destroy them piecemeal. Then we strike, divide and destroy them piecemeal. There were arguments, fears, questions, but in the end, all agreed. In the darkness before dawn, the host splintered. Blackfish taking 100 riders north, Piper leading a band of archers east toward Fairmarket, Lady Smallwood and her girls vanishing into the thickest woods. Catelyn remained with the main column, holding the center, issuing orders and letters, keeping hope alive with her very presence. For a week, the Riverlands blazed with guerrilla war. Frey supply trains were ambushed, outposts burned, small folk freed from bondage. At every turn, the Freys found resistance. Arrows from the brush, barricades of stones and logs on the roads, bands of women in patched mail stealing horses, and slitting throats in the night. The river ran dark with silt and blood. Catelyn rode each day at the head of her column, never lingering long enough to be caught. Always moving, village to village, farmstead to ruined holdfast, each one swelling her ranks. In one burned hall, she found a group of Frey prisoners, battered and broken. She questioned them herself, learning that Walder Frey had grown paranoid, convinced every river knight was a traitor, every small folk a spy. She sent word to the Vale, appealing to her sister Lysa for aid. No reply came, only silence and cold winds from the mountains. So be it. She would do without the errands. The Riverlands must save itself. One evening, as the first snow fell early and heavy, Catelyn found herself in the half-ruined sept at Pink Maiden. Candles flickering before the shattered altar. She knelt in the dust and prayed to the Seven, to the old gods, to any power that might hear. Keep my children safe. Give me strength. Let me see Rob's face again in this world or the next. The wind howled outside, and she felt for a moment the faintest touch of warmth, as if a hand rested on her shoulder. Before midnight, Blackfish returned. We caught a column of Freys near the shady brook, 300 strong. They surrendered without a fight. Half their men had deserted already. Catelyn allowed herself a weary smile. Let the survivors go with this message. The Riverlands will never kneel to the twins again. With each victory, their army grew, but so too did their enemies. Word came that Roose Bolton, ever cold and cunning, was gathering strength at Harrenhal, preparing to march. Lannister outriders were spotted along the western roads, but none dared challenge Catelyn's growing host. Then, on a morning bleak and raw with frost, a messenger arrived from the north, bearing the direwolf banner of House Stark. He was a boy, scarcely older than Bran had been, and he knelt before Catelyn, offering a letter sealed in black wax. She broke the seal with trembling hands, reading by firelight. Lady Stark, word has reached me of your victories. The North remembers, and the wolves are not broken. My men march south, though the Dreadfort watches every road. Hold fast. The day will come when we ride together, as one pack, to take back what is ours. Jon Snow, at Castle Black. Catelyn pressed the letter to her heart, tears springing unbidden to her eyes. The North remembered. The pack endures. On the 15th day since leaving River Run, as the moon shivered in a sky streaked with cloud, the rebel army approached the outskirts of the Twins. The Freys had withdrawn all their men behind thick stone walls, fires burning atop every tower. Ryman Frey's banners flew beside Bolton flayed men, red and pink in the dawn. The crossing seemed impregnable, guarded by hundreds of archers and a dozen siege engines. Catelyn called her council for one final time before the walls. We cannot storm the Twins, she said, but we can force Walder's hand. We can starve them, cut off their supplies, and show the world that the Riverlands will not be ruled by murderers and cowards. Then do? Mallister grinned, wolfish. Let's bleed them dry, my lady. Blackfish nodded. Let the old man rot in his castle. We'll give the river back to its own. For 3 weeks they laid siege, not by battering rams or flaming arrows, but by denial. No food or fodder reached the castle. No trade boats crossed the river. Each attempt was harried and turned back. Frey patrols ambushed in the night. The small folk within the Twins muttered and starved, their loyalty eroding with each empty meal. Catelyn sent envoys to every nearby house, promising amnesty and gold to those who broke from Frey service. Her banners were seen from Hag's Mire to Fairmarket. Her riders patrolled every crossing, and by the first snowfall, half the minor lords had defected or fled. Inside the Twins, Lord Walder brooded, sending missives to the Lannisters and Boltons, begging for relief. But Tywin Lannister was dead, and the West was embroiled in its own turmoil. Bolton's men came as far as Harrenhal, but would not cross the river. The siege tightened with every day, until even the Frey's own men began to desert under cover of darkness, swimming the icy river to join Catelyn's cause. It was Lady Smallwood's riders who first found the breach, a forgotten postern gate near the river's edge, unguarded save for 2 dozing boys. On a night thick with snow, Blackfish led a chosen band through the water, cold as death, and into the castle's underbelly. The fighting was sharp and brief. A handful of guards, a barricaded door, the stink of whetstone and blood. When dawn broke, Catelyn rode across the bridge with her banners high. the people of the Riverlands lining the banks to watch. Lord Walder, shriveled and furious, was dragged before her by Blackfish and Lady Smallwood's riders. He spat and cursed, eyes wild. "Do what you will, widow," he sneered. "You're no queen here." Catelyn looked down at him, her heart colder than the river. "You murdered my son. You betrayed your oaths to gods and men. The river will judge you now." They gave Lord Walder to the small folk, each whose son or daughter had died at the Twins, each whose crops had been burned, each whose family had been shattered by Frey cruelty. His fate was their justice, not hers. The banners of House Tully and Stark rose above the Twins before nightfall, and the Riverlands, at last, belonged to its own once more. Catelyn wept alone in her tent, not for sorrow, but for relief and hope. The war was not over. The North still suffered, the Lannisters still plotted, Bolton still festered in the shadows. But the river had found its voice, and Catelyn Stark, mother and widow, had become its champion. She rode the walls at dusk, the wind in her hair, remembering Robb's laugh and her father's songs, remembering all she had lost and all she had won. The Riverlands would never forget the day they cast off their chains, nor the woman who had led them from darkness into dawn. And in the silent hours before the next storm, Catelyn prayed her children would find their way home, to a land once more their own. Okay. Night on the banks of the Green Fork was a study in chill and hush. Mist curling from the river to clutch at every tent and bastion. The banners above the Twins, river trout leaping silver, direwolf rampant white on gray, red apple and scarlet black and the rest, all hung heavy with dew. Men and women shivered by campfires, clutching mugs of barley broth, the scent of wood smoke mixing with the bitter tang of fear and hope and something like deliverance. Catelyn Stark paced the battlements of the captured Twins beneath a sky pricked with 1,000 pinhole stars. Below, the river lapped black against stone and reed. The world felt suspended, as if holding its breath between storms. Inside the towers, Blackfish's men worked swiftly, disarming what remained of the Frey garrison, stripping the walls of crossbows and the towers of cruel-eyed stewards in Frey livery. Lady Smallwood's riders swept the lower halls for traders and scavengers, their laughter and sharp voices echoing off stone. Tito's Blackwood met Catelyn at the old South Tower, lantern in hand, his face creased with weariness and something else, a guarded relief. "It's done, my lady," he said. "Blackfish holds the river gate. The prisoners are accounted for, and the last of the Freys who surrendered are confined below." There was little blood. Most were eager to see the old wolf fall. Catelyn nodded. Her hands were cold, despite her gloves. "We are not butchers, Titos. No sack, no slaughter. Let them see the difference in justice." Titos gave a tired grunt, then looked back over the campfires glittering along the far bank. "Some say the river itself wept to see these stones return to your house. Others say it hungers for vengeance." Catelyn glanced at the dark water. "Let the river judge the dead. We must give the living a reason to hope again. Summon the council for dawn. I want every loyal lord present. And send word to Harrenhal. Lord Bolton will find the crossings closed to him." Mendemsad. When Titos departed, Catelyn lingered alone atop the stone parapet, the cold sinking into her bones. Beyond the camp, she could hear the faint clang of hammers, repairs already begun to the battered gates and fallen drawbridge. It was not victory she felt, nor any triumph she had once imagined. Only relief, and a hollow exhaustion deep as the water below. The Riverlands had won back their castle, but at a price she could feel in every ache and scar. As the eastern sky pinked with dawn, banners gathered in the old audience hall of the Twins. Mallister's eagle, Blackwood's raven tree, Piper's dancing maiden, Smallwood's pink apple, Went's towers, and the lesser arms of Derry. Mooton, Goodbrook, Vance, Bracken. Even the Brackens had come. Sir Hoster Bracken himself at their head, glowering at Titos Blackwood across the council table. Sir Desmond Grell sat at Catelyn's left hand, Blackfish at her right, steely-eyed and alert. Lady Smallwood perched straight-backed among the lords, her gaze ever flicking to her women at the doors. Catelyn rose, feeling the gaze of 100 river lords. "The twins are ours," she began. Her voice was rough, from smoke and sleepless nights, but it rang through the old hall. Not by chance, nor by mercy of the Lannister or Bolton, nor by Frey grace. We took them with our blood, our courage, our hope. She let her gaze rest on the men and women who had bled for her cause. We have driven out the traitors, broken the chain at last. Yet the river runs wide, and our enemies are not yet spent. Roose Bolton gathers at Harrenhal. The Lannisters are restless in the west, and winter marches from the north. Then a low mutter rippled through the hall. Piper's voice rose, brash and unbowed. "Let them come. The Riverlands are no longer sheep for butchery." Lady Wen answered, gentler but no less fierce. "But we must hold what we have won. The small folk are weary, their stores near spent, their sons and daughters gone to war or worse." Mallister stood, his eagle helm gleaming in the torchlight. "Seaguard stands ready. My ships keep watch on the western coast. If Lannister banners cross the Tumblestone, we will know." Blackfish spoke, his voice like gravel. "The Freys are broken but not scattered. There are a dozen sons, cousins, and bastards left. Some have fled north, others to the Lannisters. We cannot rule the Riverlands as Hoster Tully once did, not with old methods. The land is changed, Cat. The people with it." Catelyn drew a deep breath. "So, let us build something new. The Riverlands must not return to feuding, not Blackwood against Bracken, not lord against lord. If we quarrel now, we will lose all we have won." She turned to Lady Smallwood. "Send envoys to every town, every holdfast, every sept and village. Let them know the true Riverlords rule again, that justice, not vengeance, guides our hand." Lady Smallwood nodded. "They'll hear it from me, and from every widow and orphan who rides in my company." Sir Hoster Bracken's growl was low, but his eyes never left Tito's Blackwood. "I'll not raise sword against a Blackwood so long as the Freys and Boltons threaten our land. But my kin will not forget the old wounds." Titos answered with a weary smile. "Nor mine, Sir Hoster, but perhaps we can bury our dead together for once, and let our sons and daughters know peace." "Endel," Catelyn seized the moment. "You will shake hands, here and now, before the river and the gods." The two men hesitated, pride and ancient hate etched in every line. At last, Blackfish barked a laugh. "Go on then. The ghosts will grumble, but the river will be pleased." Bracken and Blackwood clasped arms across the table. Stiff and awkward, but the gesture rippled through the hall. A release, a beginning. Catelyn let herself smile, and felt, perhaps, the river's own approval in the distant splash of an otter. The council resolved to hold the crossings, repair the walls, and send scouts east and west. Mallister would secure Seaguard. Smallwood would ride south to quiet the border villages, and Blackfish would command the garrison at the Twins. Piper's archers would harry any Frey bands seen along the roads. All agreed to send food and aid to the small folk, even at cost to their own halls. For a few precious hours, unity held. After the council, Catelyn walked the halls of the Twins. She found Lady Smallwood instructing girls in the kitchens to ration food, showing them how to thicken soup with root and barley, how to hide a knife in a sleeve or boot. Lady Went rode with her to the highest tower, where they looked down over the swirling river. "I never thought to see this day," Lady Went said softly. "You have made the Riverlands whole again." Catelyn's smile was thin. "For now. We have bought time, nothing more. If Bolton breaks Harrenhal or Lannister gold finds its way east, we may lose all again. Still, you have given us hope. That is no small thing." Ben Dundaran. Late that night, as the great hall emptied, Catelyn slipped to the high window of the Lord's Solar. She read again the letter from Jon Snow. The black wax cracked and faded now, her son's words an echo of all she had loved and lost. She wondered if he rode south, if Arya still lived, if Sansa endured. She wondered what price must be paid for peace. A commotion at the gate startled her from her reverie. Sir Desmond hurried up the stairs, cloak flapping. "A rider from the north, my lady. A stark, sworn man bearing the direwolf banner. He brings a companion." Catelyn's heart thudded painfully. "Show me." She descended quickly, following Sir Desmond to the gatehouse. The portcullis rattled up, and a lone rider entered the bailey. Snow dusted his shoulders, his hair cropped short, face thin and wind-burnt. Behind him rode a girl in a boy's leathers, sword at her hip, eyes fierce and wary. Catelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Arya?" The girl slid from the saddle, mud splashing her boots, and stood straight as a lance. "Mother." For a moment, Catelyn could not move. Then she ran to her daughter and swept her into her arms, clutching her tight. Arya's hair smelled of smoke and horse. Her hands calloused. Her eyes older than any child's should be. But she was alive. Alive and home. They wept together. Then, in the winter-bitter bailey, as the lords and soldiers looked on in astonishment. When they parted, Arya's mouth twisted in a wry smile. "You fight like a Stark, mother. I heard tales of the river burning. They say even the Hound is afraid to cross." Catelyn laughed. A real, helpless sound, half joy, half pain. "I've had the best teachers. Come, you'll have to tell me everything." "Ben, sir." Arya's companion, the Stark man, bowed low. "She saved my life in the wild woods, my lady. She's as fierce as any knight." Catelyn thanked him and sent for warm food, dry clothes. The great hall filled that night with laughter and stories, Arya's tales of escape and chase, of faceless men and hungry wolves, of winter streets and broken castles. The soldiers drank to her, the lords marveled, and Catelyn felt, for the first time since Robb's death, the faintest flicker of hope. A future, however uncertain. But dawn brought reality. A raven arrived from the east, its message written in a hasty, trembling hand. "Bolton banners, march from Harrenhal, 600 strong with Lannister gold behind them. They move toward the crossings. We have days at best. Pray to the Seven and the old gods alike." Catelyn summoned her council at once. Blackfish's face was grim. "They'll come by the east road, avoiding the main fords. If they cross, they'll fall upon our rear." Mallister pounded the table. "We must hold the bridge at all costs. If they take the twins, we lose the Riverlands. Every last man must stand." Lady Smallwood was more thoughtful. "If we can draw them into the marshes, slow them down, perhaps the snows will turn the roads to mud." "My riders know every path." Arya spoke up, fierce and clear. "Let me go ahead, mother. I know those woods better than any lord. I can scout their numbers, harry their flanks, lead them astray if need be." Catelyn hesitated. The thought of losing Arya again was agony, but she saw the resolve in her daughter's eyes, the confidence. She nodded, voice tight. "Take whom you need. Return to me, that's all I ask." Arya grinned, wolfish, and vanished to gather her chosen scouts. Preparations began at once. Blackfish set the garrison to fortifying the bridge, blocking side streets, oiling bows, setting traps in the shallows. Mallister sent ravens to Seaguard for reinforcements. Lady Smallwood dispersed her riders into the fog-shrouded fields, blades hidden, ready to strike and vanish. For 3 days, tension built. Scouts reported Bolton men moving steadily, slow but relentless, the snow and mud slowing them to a crawl. Catelyn slept little, eating only what was pressed on her, walking the walls with Blackfish, sharing the silence of anticipation. On the eve of battle, Arya slipped back into the camp, hair wild, face flushed with excitement. "Bolton's men are weary, their horses sick, half their food lost to the bogs. They have more gold than sense, and no love for their cause." Some spoke openly of desertion. Catelyn hugged her again. "You have done more than I could have hoped. Now, rest." The dawn broke cold and pale. Horns sounded in the mists. On the far side of the bridge, Bolton banners appeared. Flayed men in pink and red, banners snapping in the wind. At their head rode Lord Roose Bolton, cold and impassive, his face unreadable. Blackfish and Mallister met Catelyn in the gateway. "The time has come," Blackfish said softly. "If we hold, the Riverlands are ours. If we break, we do not break," Catelyn answered, voice strong. "Let them come, for Robb, for all we have lost." Bolton's men advanced in grim silence. Arrows hissed from the towers, striking sparks on shields, finding gaps in armor. The marshes churned with mud and snow. Lady Smallwood's riders struck from the shadows, vanishing before pursuit. Arya and her chosen harried the flanks, setting traps, sowing confusion, picking off stragglers. Bolton tried the bridge twice, surging in tight formation, only to be driven back by Tully archers and the barricades Blackfish had prepared. The water ran red beneath the stones, and bodies piled on the banks. Catelyn watched from the high tower, lips pressed thin, every muscle trembling with the strain of command. Through the day, the fighting raged. Mallister's reinforcements arrived at dusk, riding hard from Seaguard, and struck Bolton's rear. Blackfish led the final charge from the gatehouse, swords gleaming, banners streaming. In the chaos, Arya fought beside Lady Smallwood, both drenched in mud and blood. As the sun set, the Bolton banners fell, trampled into the muck. Roose Bolton himself, wounded and pale, fled east with a handful of loyal men, harried by Piper's riders. The field belonged to the Riverlords. When the last arrow was loosed and the wounded tended, Catelyn sat in the ruined great hall with Arya at her side. Blackfish nearby, and the surviving lords gathered close. Silence stretched, heavy with exhaustion and triumph. "We are free," Catelyn whispered. "Free at last." But the price was plain in every empty seat, every silent face. As the first snows of true winter fell, blanketing the dead and living alike, Catelyn Stark understood at last that true victory was not vengeance or conquest, but the chance for peace, however hard-won. She sent ravens north to Jon, west to Seaguard, and east to every lord and lady who might still answer her call. The Riverlands would be rebuilt, stone by stone, word by word, hope by hope. And as Arya slept beside her, Catelyn watched the snow drift through the broken window and prayed for spring, and for the lost to find their way home. Ija. A cold, bruised dawn clung to the stones of the twins, a shroud of mist softening the battered ramparts and the tangled field of broken spears that marked where the Boltons had finally broken and fled. Smoke drifted in thin lines from a dozen small fires, and every breath that rose from the living seemed to hang in the air a little too long, as if reluctant to leave the bodies it warmed. The victory feast had been brief, subdued, more a vigil than a celebration. And now, with the sun still struggling to pierce the haze, Catelyn Stark stood atop the east tower and let her gaze drift along the river. The water was high and swift with snowmelt, choked with debris, torn banners, shattered shields, corpses caught in eddies among the reeds. Men moved quietly on the banks, dragging the dead to high ground, sorting friend from foe, honoring each with a cairn of stone, or a handful of words if nothing else. Catelyn watched them with a heart grown numb from loss and trial. There was always more to bury, always another price. She was not alone. Arya perched on the battlements a few yards away, legs dangling over the void, hair tangled and wild as any wolf. She wore a tunic too big for her, its sleeves rolled, and an old sword needle, strapped at her hip, newly cleaned. Arya glanced sidelong at her mother, and then back at the river, chin lifted, as if daring the world to try them again. Down below, Blackfish strode among the men, his stride unbowed by age, silver hair standing out in the pale morning. He shouted orders, called for the wounded to be brought to the hall, barked at a piper boy for mishandling a fallen horse. Titos Blackwood and Hoster Bracken stood together, overseeing the fortification of the North Gate. Their old rivalry cooled, at least for now, by shared blood and purpose. Lady Smallwood's riders, those who remained, patrolled the road, keeping sharp eyes west for any sign of new threat. A soft step behind drew Catelyn's attention. Lady Wynn approached, face wan, her hands stained with ash and wine from tending the knight's wounded. "There is word from Seaguard," she said, voice quiet. Lord Mallister's riders captured 2 Lannister envoys, sent to treat with Lord Frey. Their letters speak of new coin from Casterly Rock. Promises of food and men, if any in the Riverlands will pledge themselves to the Lion. Catelyn turned, not surprised. And will any bend the knee, do you think? Went's lips twisted. Not while your banners fly above the twins. They remember the Red Wedding, even if the Lions do not. Bendro. A long silence stretched. Below, a pair of washerwomen, one gray, one red-haired and no older than Sansa, carried a basket of torn surcoats toward the kitchens. Catelyn wondered if she would ever see her eldest daughter again, or if the ghost of Sansa would always haunt her in every flame-haired child, every song half remembered. Lady Went cleared her throat. The men need a leader, my lady. They look to you. Some say you must claim the title, Lady Paramount of the Trident, not as regent for Edmure, but in your own right. They say the gods have chosen you. Catelyn's jaw tightened. I am no queen. I want peace, not a crown. Went smiled faintly. Sometimes peace wears a crown whether she wants it or not. The words followed Catelyn down the stairs, through the battered halls where the wounded moaned and the small folk bustled, piecing together what life they could. In the great hall, a council gathered around the high table. Blackfish, Bracken, Blackwood, Mallister newly arrived, Lady Smallwood, Desmond Grell, a half-dozen minor lords. Even Arya, mud on her boots, took a place at her side, silent but attentive. Blackfish began. The Boltons are broken for now. Roose fled east, licking his wounds. But word comes that Ramsay has sent riders to the Dreadfort calling up fresh men. The Lannisters will not be idle, nor the Freys, those few who escaped our justice. Bracken slammed his fist on the table. Let them come. The river runs with our blood already. Let theirs join it. Blackwood answered, measured and calm. We cannot hold the crossings if we bleed ourselves dry with every passing day. Winter presses hard. The small folk's stores are thin, the roads nearly impassable. If Lannister or Bolton comes in strength, we will need every man. Mallister's voice, weary but resolute. Seaguard can send food and arms, but only so much. I have riders along the coast, but I cannot hold the west alone if the lions come. Lady Smallwood leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Then we must strike first, not in open war, but by sowing fear. Let the Lannisters and Boltons think us greater than we are. My girls can ride at night, set fires, turn rumors into armies. Blackfish grunted approval. Good. Let them tremble at shadows. Meanwhile, we rebuild. The twins must become a fortress. Supplies gathered, fords watched, every soul made ready. Catelyn looked to each face in turn. We hold the Riverlands for ourselves and for our children, not for Frey or Lannister or Bolton. If they want the Trident, let them come and break themselves upon it. But let us not become monsters in the process. There will be justice, but not slaughter. Mercy where it is earned, wrath where it is due. The council agreed, some reluctantly, but all saw the sense in her words. Plans were laid. Fortification, rationing, the training of small folk to arms, the spreading of rumors and false reports to every border. Letters would go to every holdfast, every minor lord, reaffirming Tully rule and the safety of those who stood loyal. Afterward, as the council dispersed, Arya lingered beside her. She fiddled with the leather straps of her jerkin, eyes darting. I want to go north, Arya said at last, her voice low but sure. Jon is there. Winterfell might still stand, and if it does, I mean to see it with my own eyes. Ow. Catelyn's heart thudded in her chest. It's not safe. The Dreadfort is strong, and winter grows harsher every week. If you're captured, Arya cut her off. I won't be. I know the woods, and I have friends. The road is dangerous, but so is standing still. You taught me that. She met her mother's gaze, stubborn as ever. I want to find Sansa. I want to find Jon. You have the Riverlands, mother. Let me have the road. There was no arguing, not truly. Arya's wildness was her armor and her weapon both. Catelyn embraced her fiercely, pressing her cheek to tangled hair. "Go with the blessing of every god then, but write whenever you can, and come back to me. Promise me that." Arya nodded, jaw set. "I promise." The next day, Arya rode out with a half-dozen of Smallwood's girls, heading north along hidden trails, disappearing into the white woods before even the sun had crested the eastern hills. Catelyn watched her daughter vanish, heart heavy but proud, and returned to her endless duties, comforting the bereaved, overseeing the wounded, meeting with lords and castellans, sending out food to starving hamlets where the winter bit deepest. As snow deepened and wind howled across the fields, the work of rebuilding began in earnest. The walls of the twins were repaired, stone by stone, and archers posted at every tower. In the villages, smiths hammered out arrowheads from scavenged iron, women spun rough cloth and baked bread from whatever grain could be gathered. Boys too young for swords learned to set snares and scout the forests. Girls rode as couriers and watched for spies. The dead were honored, graves marked with river stones, songs sung for each. Some families begged to return home, and Catelyn saw to it they had food and escort. Others chose to stay, to build anew behind the twins' walls, to serve the river, or to wait for lost kin. Messages trickled in, sometimes days old, often half lost to snow or marauders. From the neck, a Cranagman's letter reached her. Mira Reed's hand, she guessed, reporting Bolton scouts seen in the marshes, but none daring to cross with the twins in stark hands. From Old Stones, word that Lady Jenny had harbored refugees, and that Brienne of Tarth, blue-cloaked and silent, had been seen riding west, sword at her side. From Seaguard, confirmation that Lannister ships prowled the coast, but kept distance, wary of Mallister arrows and the gathering winter storms. Winter was a hungry, grinding time, but it brought a hard peace. For the first time in years, there was no war along the river. Children played on the snowy banks, their laughter thin but defiant, and old men drank by their fires, sharing stories of Blackfish's charge and Lady Stark's justice. Through it all, Catelyn worked without cease. She took no pleasure in lordship, but she carried it with dignity, refusing to be cowed by counsel or custom. The lords of the Trident met at her table and spoke their minds, but it was her decisions that shaped the course of winter. Some chafed, Hoster Bracken most of all, but none dared challenge her openly. Too many had bled for her, and too many believed. She wrote to Sansa, each letter a thread cast into darkness, uncertain if it would ever find its way. She wrote to Jon to the Wall, offering alliance and supplies if the Night's Watch should need them, though she knew how fraught that cause might be. She wrote to Brienne, urging her to come to the twins, to share what news she had found of the girls. No answers came, but she wrote all the same. When at last spring softened the snows and ice broke free on the river, the world seemed to shudder and wait. Catelyn stood atop the highest tower, watching the waters churn, sunlight dazzling on every wave. Banners fluttered strong and bright from the ramparts. Trout and direwolf, eagle and raven tree, pink apple and dancing maiden. In the village below, small folk tilled fields and patched roofs, watched over by archers and the wary eyes of Lady Smallwood's riders. One day, a stranger approached. A tall woman in battered armor, a blue cloak swirling behind. She walked with purpose, sword slung at her hip, and at her side rode a girl with hair like dark copper, weary but proud. The gates swung wide, and the whole castle seemed to pause. Catelyn came down the steps, her heart fluttering, half in dread. The girl dismounted and stood before her, head bowed. Brienne knelt, hand to sword. "My lady," she said, voice deep and certain, "I bring you your daughter." Sansa lifted her head. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with red, but her bearing was noble, every inch a Tully and Stark. "Mother." The world spun, and for a moment, Catelyn could not speak. Then she took Sansa in her arms and clung to her, wordless and shaking. Brienne stood silent, watching with something like awe. Sansa had stories to tell, of escape from King's Landing, of narrow roads and darker friends, of Brienne's strength and gentle wisdom. She bore scars, visible and not. But she was whole. And she was home. Word spread swiftly. The return of Sansa was like a benediction. Hope kindled in every heart. If one daughter could come home, perhaps another, perhaps more. The lords gathered in the hall to greet her, and Sansa met each with a smile and quiet grace, her voice steady, her presence calming. In the weeks that followed, the Riverlands found their rhythm. Lady Smallwood's scouts reported that the Boltons had fallen back, harried by their own, their hold on the north slipping. Mallister's men drove Lannister ships from the coast, and the small folk of the Trident planted fields with new resolve. The twins stood strong, no longer a symbol of treachery, but of endurance. On the first true day of spring, Catelyn called the banners once more. Every lord and lady, great and small, assembled in the hall of the twins. She stood at the head of the table, Sansa at her side, Blackfish and Brienne behind. She spoke of justice and rebuilding, of kin and loyalty, of the duty owed to those who had fallen. And when she was done, the lords knelt. Blackwood and Bracken, Mallister and Smallwood, Piper and Went. "We are the river," she said, "and the river endures." That night, the bells rang out, echoing along the banks, through every hamlet and hall. The Riverlands had chosen their lady, not by birth or marriage, but by right of courage, sacrifice, and love. And as the moon rose over the water, Catelyn Stark stood with her daughters at the highest tower, watching the world made new, and prayed that peace, hard won, dearly paid, might last if only for a time. In Ka, the first true green of spring crept shyly across the Trident, new grass trembling at the river's edge, where just weeks past the earth had been gouged and burned by the boot and hoof of war. Sunlight danced on the currents, and everywhere in the villages below the twins, people stirred, shoulders no longer hunched in fear but straightening, as if daring to believe in tomorrow. In the castle itself, walls thick with memory and still touched by pain, something changed too. A stirring, a gentling, as hope unfurled in small persistent gestures. Laughter at supper, songs rising from the kitchen, the simple dignity of a window opened wide to the breeze. Catelyn Stark moved through her days as if she too were learning to breathe again. Her hair was streaked with silver, her hands roughened from months of toil, but her bearing was proud, unbent by grief. Each morning she walked the ramparts, sometimes with Sansa at her side, sometimes alone, always with the river below, carrying the past eastward toward the sea. The banners of Tully and Stark snapped in the wind from the highest tower. Alongside them flew the arms of every house that had bent the knee in the old hall. Piper, Blackwood, Bracken, Went. Wallister. Each now staked, not just in blood and duty, but in the forging of a new order. There were still wounds to mend, both in land and heart. At dawn on the third day of the new moon, Catelyn knelt beside the graves of those lost to the winter's war. There were so many, men and boys, some whose names she would never know, women who had ridden and fought with Lady Smallwood, children who had not lived to see the thaw. Sansa stood at her mother's shoulder, head bowed. The older women from the village came too, laying wildflowers and lighting small candles in cups of river clay. For each name Catelyn spoke, Sansa pressed a pebble onto the fresh-turned earth. "It is not the dead who need us now, but the living," Catelyn murmured, her hand trembling only a little as she pressed her palm to the stones. "Yet the dead give shape to what we must become." The words settled between them, as heavy and as necessary as any prayer. Afterward, in the solar where the morning light spilled golden through the arrow slits, the work of ruling began anew. Blackfish, tireless as ever, laid out the maps, marking where scouts had seen Bolton stragglers and where Mallister outriders had forced a Lannister foraging party back toward the Golden Tooth. Tito's Blackwood and Hoster Bracken, stiff but civil, reported on the planting. Barley up by half-near Stone Hedge, oats thin along the Blue Fork, pigs rooting wild in the West Wood. herds replenishing slower than hoped. Lady Went wrote lists of new marriages, alliances binding the river lords closer together, sowing rifts old as the conquest. Catelyn listened, asked questions, sometimes argued. She ruled from her seat, not as a conqueror, but as a gardener might, with patience and occasional ferocity. She sent food to the farthest, neediest villages, even if it meant short rations at the Twins. She ordered work crews to the bridge, not just for repair but for beautification. Paint, banners, flower boxes. She pressed lords and knights to send their sons and daughters as pages, not hostages but students, to learn together, to knit the Riverlands' future tight. News of Arya came sporadically. Riders glimpsed her near White Harbor, or heard rumor of a wolf girl who led bands of orphans against Bolton men. All was gone before anyone could catch her. Catelyn kept each report like a jewel, hoping, fearing, trusting in her youngest's fierce wildness. One afternoon, as the fields outside turned gold beneath the rising sun, a messenger from the Vale arrived at the castle. He bore a letter sealed with the falcon and moon of Arryn, addressed to Catelyn Stark. Lady of the Riverlands. She read it in private, her jaw clenched. Lysa's words were as she expected. Apologies wrapped in pride. No promise of soldiers, only thin assurances of kinship and prayers. Sansa found her by the window, letter crumpled in her fist. She will not come? Sansa asked softly. No, Catelyn replied, voice weary. The Eyrie is a high place, and my sister is afraid of the world below. We must build what we need without her. Sansa stood silent, then slipped her hand into her mother's. Then we will. We are stronger than she knows. So the work went on. Blackfish drilled new recruits daily, his bark echoing across the yard as boys learned to notch arrows and girls to ride. Lady Smallwood's women ranged the woods and roads, acting as eyes and messengers, binding the small folk to the castle with gifts of bread and honest words. Lady Went visited each newly joined couple, a blessing and reminder that the old feuds were now buried deeper than any grave. The days lengthened. Birds returned to the reeds and rooflines. On the first truly warm afternoon, Catelyn walked the banks of the Trident with Sansa, their boots sinking in the soft earth. They watched a pair of boys building a raft from driftwood, shouting and laughing as it spun in the current, one waving a scrap of blue as a makeshift banner. It's as if they don't remember the war at all, Sansa said, a sad smile touching her lips. Catelyn nodded. Children remember what we show them. If they see peace, they will believe in it. If they see only vengeance, they will grow into wolves themselves. Them? Sansa stopped, picking a wild daffodil and tucking it behind her ear. Do you regret it? Taking the twins, fighting for the Riverlands? Catelyn looked at her daughter. So much older now. So much her father's child, with Ned's resolve and quiet dignity. I regret only what was lost. But if I had not fought, more would be gone. It is not enough to survive. We must build something worth the pain. That night, at supper, a hush fell when the doors swung wide. A man entered, broad-shouldered, black-haired, wrapped in a faded cloak. The room froze as he strode forward, the firelight glinting off a ring shaped like a direwolf. Sansa gasped, and Catelyn's heart leapt. Yon? He knelt before her, voice rough from travel. Mothered. I have come south with news from the wall. Nancy she. She pulled him up, hands shaking, and embraced him. Jon Snow was harder than when she last saw him. His face lined, his hair touched with white at the temples, but his eyes were the same, honest, troubled, kind. He brought tidings both grim and hopeful. The wall stood, battered, but unbroken. Stannis Baratheon had taken Winterfell from the Boltons, with the help of northern lords and wildlings both. Ramsay Bolton was dead. The Dreadfort burned, but winter remained fierce. Food was scarce, the land ravaged by war and ice, but the north was rising, piecing itself together. The Night's Watch held the wall, but their numbers were thin, and the threat from beyond the ice ever present. Catelyn listened, holding his hand, her eyes bright with tears. "You have done more than anyone could have asked, Jon. And now you are home, if only for a time." Bah. The castle rejoiced. Lords and ladies pressed Jon with questions, offering fealty and eager for news. He spoke little, weary from the road, but at Sansa's urging, he joined her on the ramparts beneath the stars. They talked for hours, of Robb and Bran, of Arya's legend and Rickon's wildness, of Ned's lessons, of the pain of being lost and the comfort of returning. Sansa clung to her brother, and Catelyn sat nearby, listening as the river spoke beneath them, steady and old as the land itself. As the moon set, Jon told them his greatest fear, that the long winter was not over, that the threat from the far north, White Walkers, Whites, things even maesters could not name, was real and growing. He urged them to be vigilant, to unite the Riverlands and North, to remember that the wall was not just a border, but a shield for all of Westeros. Catelyn promised. She would keep watch, gather stores, train every able hand. She sent ravens the next day to every lord and lady, warning them of the true winter, urging them to build alliances not just of need but of trust. In the weeks that followed, the twins became a true seat of power. Councils were held by sunlight and candle, with Jon advising where he could, Sansa settling disputes, Blackfish training new knights and archers. The riverfolk brought their children for blessing, their dead for mourning, their dreams for hope. Word came at last of Arya. A band of orphans, led by a wolf girl, had saved a hamlet near the gift from wildling raiders. She was seen last heading east, always a step ahead, a ghost and a promise. Catelyn sent word north, offering amnesty and welcome to any who wished to find peace below the wall. Sansa wrote to Brienne, urging her to return, to stand with the Starks and Tullys as the next storm gathered. On the first day of high summer, Catelyn stood at the river's edge with Sansa and Jon. They watched the sun rise, gold and warm, the water running bright beneath the banners. For the first time, Catelyn felt not just relief, not just hard-won satisfaction, but true hope. A hope that the world could be made new, if only for a season. She turned to her children and spoke softly, so only they would hear. "The river will always carry us forward. We can never go back. But together, we can shape the banks, guide the current, choose what seeds we plant. That is what it means to rule. That is what it means to endure." Sansa smiled, slipping her hand into her mother's. Jon nodded, his shadow long and sure beside them. And as the wind picked up, fluttering the banners overhead, Catelyn Stark closed her eyes and listened. Not to the clamor of old pain or the warning of new dangers, but to the quiet promise of the Trident. That from grief could come strength, from strength could come peace. And from peace at last, a home for all those who had wandered too long in the dark. Oh, ha! Mist drifted above the Trident, curling ghost-like through new-grown reeds and over the blackened earth where battles had been fought and lost, and at last, won. In the cool hush before dawn, Catelyn Stark moved alone through the bailey of the twins. Her steps slow but measured, each footfall a silent accounting of all that had come before. She paused near the old weirwood, its face scarred by age, its leaves flush with spring. She pressed a palm to its trunk and breathed in the faint scent of sap, letting the memory of Ned's hands, rough and gentle, guide her own. It had been weeks since Jon's arrival, weeks in which the castle had seemed to wake and expand, as if its very stones grew lighter. With Sansa, her red hair a banner of its own, and Jon steady-eyed and quiet, Riverrun's court felt reborn, the air crackling with possibility, and the weight of all that must be done. The nights were still cold, but laughter rang out after supper, and it was not so rare now for a song to drift through the halls, or for children to dash between the kitchens and the garden, their games unshadowed by fear. But for every moment of peace, a dozen worries gnawed at Catelyn's mind. Supplies were thin, and though Blackfish rode daily to oversee the fields and woods, he returned grim-faced. Late frost had claimed half the barley, and wild pigs had trampled the oats. Lady Went's letters brought news of thieves along the roads. hungry bands with no banners, desperate men who would not be welcomed at any hearth. Worse, rumors swirled from the east. Lannister men gathering near the Golden Tooth, red cloaks buying swords with golden lies, sowing dissent in border towns. Catelyn met daily with her council, now grown to include not only Blackfish, Mallister, Blackwood, Bracken, and Lady Smallwood, but Sansa, who had proved deft at soothing rivalries and reading the hearts of anxious men. Jon sat beside her, quiet but attentive. His counsel weighted with hard northern wisdom. He spoke rarely, but when he did, even Bracken listened. "We have won the river," Blackfish declared on a bright morning. The map spread across the council table. "But the war has not ended. The lions still prowl our borders, and the Boltons, though broken, are not all dead. We must keep watch, build stores, arm the foe." Bracken grumbled. "A fortress is no good if we starve inside it. We must trade, open the roads, bring the Vale or the Reach into alliance." Mallister frowned. "The sea is restless. Lannister ships patrol beyond Seaguard, and the Arbor sends only silence. As for the Eyrie," Catelyn's voice, cool and certain, cut through their fretting, "the Eyrie will not descend while Lysa rules, and the Reach looks west, not north. We must depend on ourselves and those who have bled with us." Jon is right. The Wall cannot spare men. But the Night's Watch can trade salt fish for oats and barley. We must send out riders, honest men and women, to every village. If there are thieves, we offer them work. If they are hungry, we feed them. No one will fight for us if we let them starve. "Then," Sansa added, "the small folk will remember kindness. If we show mercy, we will have more eyes than any lord's spies. Let every household know they are seen." The council nodded, and plans were made. Riders left the next dawn. Mallister's men north to Seaguard, Smallwood's women east to Fairmarket and Pink Maiden, Blackfish himself south toward Acorn Hall and the Red Fort. Sansa sent letters with each, written in a neat, graceful hand, invitations and promises woven together. She saw to it that each message ended with her own name. Sansa Stark, daughter of the North, now of the Riverlands as well. Catelyn watched her daughter with pride. Sansa moved through the halls with a steady dignity, comforting the wounded, teaching young girls their letters, listening to every story, never letting her grief or fear spill out for all to see. Jon worked beside Blackfish, drilling boys in spearwork and bow, sometimes taking the youngest into the woods for lessons in tracking and survival. Evenings he joined Catelyn and Sansa on the ramparts, and sometimes, when the wind was soft, he spoke of the Wall, the wildlings, and the old gods. It was during one such evening, as the sun bled pink across the river and the first frogs began to sing, that a horn sounded from the eastern gate. A rider galloped in, horse lathered, face caked with dust. Catelyn hurried down, Jon and Sansa close behind. The rider slid from the saddle and knelt. "Riders, my lady. 3 dozen at least, Lannister men, heading toward Maidenpool. They fly no banners, but I saw gold and crimson on their cloaks." "Men too," Catelyn nodded. "See to the horse, rest and eat, then ride out again. We need every sighting." She turned to her council, already gathering. "If they move to Maidenpool, they mean to turn Lord Mooton, or strike at Lady Went. We cannot let them sow rebellion behind our lines." Blackfish was grim. "Let me ride with 50. We'll harry them, force them into the marshes, see if their gold is worth more than their lives." Jon put a hand to his uncle's arm. "If they want to turn the towns, best we move first. Send word to Mooton. Remind him how the lions repay their friends. I'll ride with you, uncle." Catelyn agreed, but her worry twisted sharp. "Go, but take only those you trust. Sansa and I will hold the castle." Then, before dawn, Blackfish and Jon rode out, joined by a band of chosen riders, Mallister men and Blackwood archers, a handful of Smallwood's best scouts. Sansa watched them go, her face pale but composed. Catelyn hugged her fiercely, then stood at the gate until the last shadow vanished. The days that followed were tense, every hour bringing new rumors. Sansa worked twice as hard, organizing food for the refugees still arriving from burned-out hamlets, overseeing lessons for the youngest, ensuring the castle's stores were stretched, but never depleted. She listened at council, learning which lord harbored which old grudge, which house's fields were most in need of seed, which smith could be trusted with new blades. Her calm steadied the lords, and soon even Bracken deferred to her, if only in matters of bread and fire. Catelyn meanwhile walked the walls each evening, speaking with the guards, listening to the pulse of her people. She sent Lady went west to parley with House Goodbrook, who had wavered since the autumn, winning them back not with threats but with offers of seed, grain, and justice for old wrongs. She called on the Septons to bless the fields and hold fast to hope, to remind the small folk that the gods watched over the humble and the mighty alike. A week passed, and word came at last. Jon and Blackfish had ambushed the Lannister riders near the ruins of Harrenhal, scattering them and sending a handful back to Casterly Rock with warnings branded into their cheeks. Traitor! Jon himself returned with a dozen prisoners, their gold spent buying their lives, their tongues wagging with news. The Lannisters meant to hire sellswords from the free cities, a new gamble to win back the Riverlands. Catelyn met Jon in the yard, mud-splattered and tired but unbowed. He smiled, and she saw in him so much of Ned, and something new. Hope tempered with iron. "We broke them for now," Jon said. "But there will be more. The gold flows west to east, and there are always men who'll fight for coin." She nodded. "We'll not win this with swords alone. If the lords of the Riverlands stand together, if the people believe, we can weather any storm." Jon's gaze flickered to the towers, the river, the green fields. "And if winter comes again, harder than before?" Catelyn put her hand on his arm. "Then we endure. That is all we have ever done." Summer rolled over the land. The fields grew thick, the orchards heavy with blossom. Catelyn saw to it that every orphaned child was given a home, every widow a place at table, every crippled man a task suited to his strength. Sansa organized a fair at midsummer, inviting lords and small folk alike, offering prizes for archery and music, games for children, feasts for the hungry. Jon and Blackfish presided over the contests, their laughter ringing out over the crowd. For one day, there was no talk of Lannisters or Boltons or even the Wall, only the simple, defiant joy of the Riverlands alive and whole. At dusk, as the last fire died and the people drifted homeward, Catelyn stood with her family on the bridge, the banners of house and hope fluttering overhead. "We have done well," Sansa whispered, leaning against her mother. "For a little while, at least." Catelyn smiled, feeling the river's pulse beneath her feet. For a little while is sometimes enough, and sometimes it is the beginning of all things. But peace was always fragile. 2 days after the fair, ravens arrived, one from Winterfell, one from the Wall. The first bore news that Stannis Baratheon was dead, slain in battle outside Winterfell's gates, and that the Manderleys and Umbers quarreled over who would rule the north. The second was colder still. Wildlings, whites, and worse had been seen beyond the Wall, and Jon was needed urgently at the Night's Watch. He met his family in the solar that night, face shadowed. "I must go north. The Wall needs me. The threat is not ended. If it breaks all this," he swept a hand at the walls, "the fields, the children laughing below, all this will fall." Catelyn did not weep. She embraced him, then held him at arm's length. "You are my son, always. The Riverlands are your home, as much as the north. Go. We will hold the trident. We will wait for you." Sansa pressed a kiss to Jon's cheek. "Bring Arya home if you find her, and take our love with you." He rode out at dawn with Blackfish at his side for the first leagues, the banners of wolf and trout high above them. Summer waned. The fields yielded grain and fruit. The people gathered in harvest. The castle grew fat with food and laughter. Lords brought their children to foster, and the Riverlands, wounded, battered, but still standing, became a beacon in a world where hope was rare. In the quiet after harvest, as the leaves turned gold, a rider appeared at the gates. She was lean and wild, her hair tangled, her face shadowed by road and war. But the sword at her hip was Needle, and her eyes, Where, Arias? Catelyn met her halfway down the yard, hands trembling. Arya, my heart. For a moment, Arya only stared, wary as a wolf in a snare. Then at last, she broke into a run and threw herself into her mother's arms, and Catelyn held her as if she would never let go. That night, in the great hall, Sansa and Arya sat together, heads bent close, telling secrets and stories, laughter and tears running together. Catelyn watched them and felt, for a breath, the family she had lost returned to her, if only in part. She thought of Ned, of Robb, of Bran and Rickon. Absent, perhaps lost forever, but alive in memory and in the strength of those who remained. The Riverlands grew quiet. Winter was not yet ended, but hope was no longer a stranger in the halls of the twins. Catelyn ruled with mercy and resolve, her daughters at her side, the banners of all the river lords flying together. The lords whispered of peace. The small folk spoke her name with respect, and the songs sung in the kitchens no longer told only of sorrow, but of survival, of reunion, of the river's promise. And so the world turned, the river running ever forward, carrying with it grief and hope in equal measure. In the castle above its banks, Catelyn Stark, Lady of the Trident, held her daughters close and dreamed, at last, not of vengeance or sorrow, but of what might grow in the quiet, stubborn light of spring. Early autumn in the Riverlands arrived on a hush, the kind that seemed to honor all the blood and tears the land had drunk. The sky was high and clear, deep blue, and the sunlight touched every roof and rampart of the twins with a soft gold, as if the old stones themselves could finally believe in a future. Catelyn Stark stood at the highest window of the east tower, gazing out at the slow, shining braid of the Trident. Far below, fields bristled with barley and wheat, haystacks ringed the paddocks, and the orchards beyond the wall gave off a tart, living scent of apples. It was harvest time, and for the first time in many years, no army threatened to burn or seize it. From her perch, she could see wagons coming up the road from Fairmarket and Pink Maiden, banners fluttering, House Piper, Blackwood, Mallister. Even the bracken colors were among them, and she allowed herself a small private smile at that. Behind her, Sansa and Arya were quarreling, playfully this time, over the best arrangement for the day's feast. Arya wanted benches in the yard, where everyone could sit together beneath the open sky. Sansa favored tables dressed with what flowers remained, the hall adorned with banners and scented candles. Their voices, bright and affectionate, braided together, and Catelyn listened, her heart warmed by the simple sound. "Let them have the yard," Arya was saying. "We can put torches on the walls when it gets dark, and no one will care about the mud. The last time we did this, Robb fell in the pond and blamed it on Bran." Sansa laughed, a bell-like sound. "The cooks would never forgive you if half the pies ended up on the grass. And it's the first harvest since the war. Let them see that the hall is whole again. The banners should be there, not flapping in the rain." Catelyn turned, unable to keep the fondness from her voice. "You will have to settle it together as sisters do. But remember, there is room for both sun and banners in this world. That is the lesson the Riverlands must learn if peace is to hold." They smiled at her, Arya's grin reckless and wild, Sansa's eyes shining with warmth. They slipped away together, already scheming, and Catelyn stood alone, hands clasped behind her back, listening as the castle woke in earnest. Cooks calling for bread and herbs, stable boys leading horses to water, the creak of gates as the early wagons rolled in with their bounty. Below, the small folk prepared for the harvest feast. The bailey filled with laughter and anticipation. Bushels of grain were stacked high, apples piled in barrels, and jars of honey gleamed on long tables. Every soul in the castle and the surrounding hamlets was welcome, and messengers had gone as far as Maidenpool and Oldstones to invite all who had given loyalty in the hard days. Lady Smallwood arrived with her archers, and even stoic Blackfish allowed himself a rare smile at the sight of the village girls practicing with longbows on the green. Catelyn descended the tower and stepped out into the yard, the sun bright on her brow. She greeted each newcomer by name when she could, and by deed when she could not. The old way, her father's way. Never let a man think himself forgotten, nor a woman believe her loyalty unseen. The hall, when Sansa finished with it, was a marvel. Banners of every house allied in the long struggle draped the beams, gold and red, black and green, blue and silver. Tables wound through the great chamber like a river, twined with ivy and late roses, the hearths burning bright, even as afternoon's warmth lingered. Arya's benches stood outside, ringed by torches and fire pits, and the air rang with the sound of music, flutes, drums, the stamping of boots, the laughter of children chasing dogs through the grass. As dusk approached, the feast began. The tables groaned with roast duck and stewed apples, honeyed turnips, river trout baked with herbs, loaves of fresh bread. Catelyn sat at the high table with her daughters at either side, Blackfish and Lady Smallwood beside them, and watched as the lords and smallfolk mingled freely. Mallister passed a horn of cider to a shepherd from the outskirts. Bracken clapped Blackwood on the shoulder after a wager on who could eat more pies. Lady Went danced with the miller's youngest son, her laughter ringing above the crowd. In the fading light, Catelyn rose, and the hall fell gradually silent. She stood before them, straight-backed and clear-voiced, her words weaving through the smoke and candlelight. "We have seen much sorrow and more hunger," she said. "But the river remembers its course. It endures drought and flood, but always finds the sea. So must we. We have lost much, sons and fathers, daughters and mothers, but tonight, we honor not only the fallen but the living. We rebuild with every loaf, every song, every field sown and reaped. Let no man or woman here forget. Peace is not a gift but a labor, and it belongs to all." A cheer rose, hesitant at first, then swelling, spreading from the lords to the lowest servant. Arya whooped. Sansa clapped her hands, and Catelyn smiled through the prickle of tears. The music began again, faster now. Arya dragged Sansa onto the green for a dance, and Blackfish, grumbling, but grinning, allowed himself to be swept into a reel by Lady Smallwood. As twilight fell, the torches blazed, the fires grew bright, and the people of the Riverlands celebrated their first true harvest in peace. Much later, when the moon was high and the laughter faded to murmurs, Catelyn wandered the quiet halls. In the kitchen, Sansa and a pair of girls cleaned the last of the dishes, sharing secrets and dreams. On the steps, Arya and a clutch of younger children plotted midnight adventures, giggling as they crept into the shadows. Blackfish was last to bed, checking the gates, nodding to the night watch with a soldier's pride. Catelyn stepped out onto the battlements, letting the cool night wrap around her. The river flowed below, steady and eternal. For the first time in years, she let herself hope that this peace could last. She thought of her sons, of Bran and Rickon, far away, perhaps lost, but alive in memory. Of Jon, somewhere beyond the wall, watching over all of Westeros as winter crept south. Of Robb, whose name was still spoken at every fire, whose spirit haunted the hall in the best of ways. She felt Ned's presence then, quiet and certain, as if his hand rested on her shoulder. Morning brought new challenges. News from the Neck, sent by reed messengers. Marsh fires had been seen at Moat Cailin, wildlings driven south by cold and hunger. Catelyn dispatched riders north to offer aid, knowing well that hungry men could be made into foes or friends, depending on the hand that fed them. From Seaguard, word of a quarrel between Mallister and the ships of Oldtown. A merchant dispute, nothing more, but a reminder that peace required vigilance as surely as war. A council was called. Blackfish reported that Bracken and Blackwood both wanted more land for their new tenants. Lady Smallwood, that bandits had been seen near Pink Maiden, but her archers had driven them off. Sansa suggested organizing a harvest market at the Twins, a gathering to draw traders and minstrels from as far as King's Landing. An act of confidence, she said, and an invitation to the world that the Riverlands was open and strong again. Catelyn approved, and within days Sansa was deep in the work, writing letters, coaxing merchants and singers, promising safe passage and generous wares. Arya chafed at the peace. Her restless energy turned to scouting the woods and teaching the castle's children to shoot and ride. Some nights she rode out alone, returning at dawn with wild stories and burrs in her hair, but always with a keen eye for anything that threatened their newfound calm. It was Arya who brought word that a band of former Frey men, leaderless and bitter, were hiding in the marshes near the Red Fork, plotting to reclaim the twins. Catelyn met with her captains and decided on a quiet, swift strike. Lady Smallwood's archers and a handful of Bracken men. No banners, no trumpets, just a promise to the Freys that vengeance had no place in the new order. The threat was put down quickly, with as little blood as possible, and those who surrendered were given a choice: join the harvest, earn a living, or be turned out. Most chose the plow over the sword. Peace was fragile. She reminded them all, and had to be kept with mercy as much as might. As autumn deepened, the harvest market drew near. Banners flew from the towers. Traders arrived with carts full of saffron, cheese, and bolts of bright cloth. Minstrels played in every corner. People came from the Vale, the Reach, even from the hills of Dorne and the green heart of the Stormlands. The halls of the twins rang with laughter, barter, song, and the noise of children at play. One night, a troupe of singers performed a song for Catelyn and her daughters, an old ballad of the Trident, now with new verses about the lady who had led her people from darkness to dawn. Arya rolled her eyes. Sansa blushed, but Catelyn smiled, accepting the gift not for herself, but for every mother and daughter, every lost son, every scarred field made whole again. Winter would come. It always did. But for now, as the moon silvered the river and the castle brimmed with voices and light, Catelyn Stark allowed herself the rare comfort of hope, and the promise, made not to gods or banners, but to her daughters and all her people, that the river would keep running, and so would they together, toward whatever tomorrow might bring. I.K. First frost dusted the riverbanks in a white lacework that shimmered beneath the morning sun. Each blade of grass and gnarled willow branch edged with a promise of winter's return. Catelyn Stark rose before dawn, as was now her habit, to walk the silent corridors of the twins and listen for the quiet music of a household at peace. From the kitchens came the muffled sounds of bread being kneaded, and the soft laughter of Sansa instructing a group of girls on the best way to twist dough for harvest loaves. From the yard, shouts and laughter. Arya already at her drills, outpacing boys and girls alike with bow, wood and sword. Beyond the walls, smoke trailed from 100 cottage chimneys. As the villages began to wake, she paused in the solar with her ledgers and letters, surveying the charts of stores and yields, mindful that prosperity in autumn could so easily turn to hunger by spring. Mallister's last report spoke of fog and high tides at Seaguard, delaying merchant ships. Blackfish had sent word from the outlying fords, travelers from the north moving south, some seeking work, others only shelter. In Fairmarket, a merchant claimed to have seen a white direwolf watching from the edge of the woods, and the tale had spread like fire. Hope and unease mingled in every retelling. When the sun was a thin coin above the trees, Catelyn joined her daughters in the kitchen yard. The air was brisk and bright, the grass silvered underfoot. Arya, face flushed, hair escaping its braid, leapt a stone wall and landed grinning beside Sansa. Sansa, aproned and dusted with flour, greeted her mother with a serene smile and pressed a warm roll into her hand. "We'll have enough for every household," Sansa said, glancing at the stacked baskets. "Lady Smallwood's girls are baking in the old ovens. I sent half the bread to the orphans at the Green Bridge." "Thank you, darling," Catelyn said, brushing her daughter's cheek. "There are still children sleeping rough by the fords. The river is kindest to those who remember its weakest streams." Arya cocked her head, still bristling with restless energy. "Will you come watch the archery? I've 3 girls who can split a post at 50 yards. "In a little while," Catelyn promised. "The council meets at midday." Arya rolled her eyes but grinned. "You never miss a council, mother." Catelyn squeezed Arya's shoulder. "Nor should you. Someday you'll sit at the head of such a table, and you'll be glad of every boring argument about barley and roads." Arya snorted, but Sansa laughed. She'll have to, if she ever wants her own bread. By midday, the high table in the hall was crowded. Mallister, freshly arrived from Seaguard, still smelling of sea air. Blackwood and Bracken, side by side, exchanging tart words but united in purpose. Lady Smallwood, sleeves rolled, hands ink-stained from ledgers. Lady Went, elegant in black and gold. Catelyn sat with Sansa on her right, Arya on her left, Blackfish at her back, a living bulwark. Reports were given. Bandits near Maidenpool put to flight by Smallwood's archers. Blackwood's men mending the old bridge at Raventree. Bracken offering 5 wagons of grain for every 10 of timber from the Blackwoods. Sansa made note of every offer, every promise. Arya watched the proceedings, occasionally stifling a yawn but keenly aware of who smiled, who scowled, who seemed uneasy. Mallister shared tidings from the coast. The Lannister ships have not ventured east, though rumor holds that sell sails gather at Lannisport. A merchant from Old Town claims peace, but the Queen's Hand, Kevin Lannister now, sends no word. King's Landing is too weak to threaten us, Blackfish said, and the Westerlands will bleed gold before men. We should not fear them, but neither can we ignore them. Bracken rumbled. We must fortify the fords in the main road to King's Landing. If they come, let them find the way barred. Now, Catelyn nodded. Agreed. Sansa. See that the carpenters and masons are given what they need. Lady Smallwood, your riders know the woods best. Post them where the road bends, where a foe might try to slip unseen. Lady Went spoke softly. The Septons ask for aid. 2 of their houses were burned in the last raid. The river folk need hope as much as bread. Send the stonecutters and what coin can be spared, Catelyn ordered. The gods will not mend the wounds of war, but we must show we remember them. When the council ended, Sansa remained in the hall to meet with the scribes and organize the distribution of supplies. Arya joined Lady Smallwood's archers, riding out to the north fields. Catelyn returned to the Solar to read letters and grant audiences. A procession of small folk climbed the stairs. A baker seeking flour, a woman whose boy had vanished in the last frost, a smith wanting to wed his apprentice. Catelyn listened to each, weighed their needs, offered judgment or comfort, sometimes both. Justice was 1,000 tiny tasks, each one essential. In the late afternoon, as clouds gathered in the west, a rider appeared at the main gate. Horse blowing hard, his cloak rimed with frost. He dismounted and knelt before Catelyn in the hall. A raven from the wall, my lady. Lord Snow sends greeting. The wildlings press south and the dead walk in the woods. He asks for what aid you can spare. Grain, warm clothes, any hands willing to fight? The hall fell silent. Catelyn's heart clenched at Jon's words, at the memory of him riding north, his eyes grave with burdens no man should bear alone. She rose and addressed the council. The wall is our shield, as much as it is the North's. We will send what we can. Grain, wool, steel. Arya, would you ride north with the first wagons? Arya's eyes sparkled with excitement and dread. Let me go. I'll bring word to Jon, and I'll bring anyone who wants to fight. Mallister frowned. We need every sword here. If the wall falls, will the river stand? Not if we stand alone, Catelyn replied. If we wait for the enemy to come to us, we will be too late. It was agreed. Over the next days, carts were loaded. Blacksmiths pressed into service forging arrowheads and spear points. Weavers spun woolen cloaks and mittens. Arya assembled a band of riders, archers and scouts, a handful of stubborn boys, a score of women with axes and bows, eager for a purpose greater than harvest or peace. Sansa saw to it that every bundle was marked with a wolf and trout, every letter sealed with the Tully sigil. The night before they left, Catelyn found Arya on the walls, gazing north. The torches cast long shadows, but Arya's eyes shone. I'll find Jon, Arya promised. We'll keep the wall. You keep the river. Catelyn pulled her daughter close, heart pounding with pride and fear. Write me. Send a raven with every word." At dawn, Arya rode out, banners snapping behind her. The yard was crowded, lords and ladies, small folk and soldiers, all waving, cheering, wishing strength and safe passage. Sansa pressed a kiss to Arya's cheek before she mounted, and Blackfish, trying to hide the moisture in his eyes, tucked a small dagger into Arya's belt. Catelyn watched until the column vanished in the morning mist, then turned back to her duties. The days were busier than ever. Sansa proved indispensable, managing food stores and sending supplies north and east, fielding requests, settling disputes with the ease of a queen. Catelyn's pride in her daughter deepened. Sansa's steady hand and calm judgment won her respect across the Riverlands. Word from Arya was scarce. One brief letter from Mo Catelyn, another from White Harbor, both written in a rushed, wild hand. All is well, heading north. Jon needs more archers. The cold is worse than we remember, but the people fight for hope, not fear. Autumn's grip tightened. Mornings began with frost and ended with rain. Markets thrived, and for the first time in years, merchants from the south and west outnumbered the castle zone. There was gossip of peace in King's Landing, of Cersei's exile, of the Reach turning inward with harvests poor, but none dared test the strength of the river yet. One night, Catelyn stood before the fire in her solar, thinking of Arya, Jon, and all the children now grown, scattered to every corner. Sansa entered, her arms full of scrolls and ledgers. "You work too hard," Sansa said. "Let me take the rest. It's my turn." Catelyn smiled and shook her head. "It never ends, Sansa, but it is a good burden." They worked together by candlelight, reviewing letters, making decisions. Sansa's eyes were thoughtful. "Do you ever think the river will be safe? Truly? Or is peace only ever a breath between storms?" Catelyn's answer was quiet. "The river endures because it bends and turns and carries on. So must we. We do not own peace, Sansa. We only hold it for as long as we can, for those who come after." A knock at the door. Lady Smallwood, smiling, cheeks flushed. "Your Grace," she said, bowing with exaggerated formality that made Sansa giggle. "The archers at the gate have returned. There is news from Arya and from the wall." Catelyn hurried down to the yard, Sansa at her side. The rider handed over 2 letters, one sealed with the Stark wolf, the other marked with Arya's rough sigil. Jon's letter was brief. "Winter deepens. The dead move. Arya arrived. She leads as only a Stark can. Pray for us. Send all the hope you have." Arya's was longer, a breathless scrawl. "Made it north. Jon sends thanks. We ride the woods every night, watching for dead things. The wall stands, barely. The folk here remember the river and your kindness. I'll come home soon, or send more news. Don't worry. We are not afraid." Catelyn pressed both letters to her heart, blinking back tears. She turned to the assembled crowd in the yard, her voice clear and strong. "The north stands. The wall holds. The river will not falter. Send more food, more arrows, more hope, and pray to every god that our children find their way home." That night, as the frost thickened on the stones and the river sang its ancient song, Catelyn Stark knelt by the hearth with Sansa beside her. Together they spoke prayers. Old gods, new, and every small hope in between. For peace to endure, for the world to grow gentle, and for the return of all those lost and wandering. And as the fire burned low, and the night deepened, the Riverlands dreamed of spring, and of the day when every child of the Trident, by blood or by bond, would return to find a land as strong and steadfast as the river itself.